This is Steve Downs, the voice of Master Chief, Spartan 117. Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. Anthony and Skylar.
Remember to start your recording.
Master Chief, out.
Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. My name is Anthony Nicolosi.
And I'm Skylar Sokol.
And Skylar, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about randomness.
Random!
We're talking about Anthony's gambling addiction. No, I'm just kidding.
It's called the stock market.
Actually true. That really is your gambling addiction. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Don't leave. Don't leave. Please don't leave. We're here to talk about randomness in video games. And also, I think probably this conversation will span to board games as well, since randomness plays a very large role there, even more than in video games a lot of the time.
Well,
so,
yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
What is randomness? According to game theoretical concepts, randomness is information that enters the game state which is not supposed to ever be predictable.
Okay.
Okay.
That's an interesting definition. Yeah, okay.
I think that is pretty reasonable. Like, in its purest form, randomness is unpredictable information.
Okay.
Or unpredictable events, right? So, this is distinct, though, from things that are unpredictable or uncertain in games. Like, for example, in chess, you're uncertain of what move your opponent's going to make, and it may be hard to predict it, but that's not randomness.
Right. Okay.
Chess is a game with no randomness, even though it does have unpredictability. As this article on Gamma Sutra by Keith Bergen that I found about randomness in game design says, all games must have some kind of unpredictability in order to function, but randomness isn't the only way to achieve that. Now, interestingly enough, this is totally unrelated to randomness, but this statement is a little untrue nowadays with the existence of like walking simulators and stuff. Those kinds of strictly linear narrative experiences reduce unpredictability almost to zero, and they are still considered games in some way.
I would actually say idle games that don't involve elements of randomness also
can
break
significantly
that
reduce unpredictability. Yeah, it is interesting.
I mean, you can literally just run, for example, even thinking about our trivia game, you run research. If all you ever did was research, there's no.
I guess the question then is that a
randomness.
game? Is what this guy would probably ask.
That's maybe another topic, I guess.
Right. Anyway,
but yeah, interesting.
Yeah, there's two types of randomness that are two categories. And this is where I think randomness gets really interesting. Input randomness and output randomness. Output randomness is when we think of randomness in games, we're usually referring to output randomness. It is noise injected between the player's decision and the outcome. For example, it would be the dice roll combat in Risk or Memoir 44. It's like if in Dota, for example, when a hero attacks another hero, they randomly do damage within a range, and that's determined after you attack. Any system that does not have output randomness is technically deterministic, in that it is fully all the information in the system is fully available once the input is done.
Yes, and executing a set of inputs will always result in the same output.
Right,
it's deterministic.
In something with no output randomness. That's right.
Right. Yep.
Now, granted, this gets more complex when there's multiple people, but if all of those people perform the same inputs, you'll still get the same outcome, even though from their individual perspectives, stuff might be unpredictable. Input randomness, on the other hand, informs the player before you make a decision. In my opinion, the most simple example of this is shuffling a deck of cards before you play a card game. That's input randomness, but then drawing the cards and putting them into your hand is output randomness. Technically, it would be more simple if the game was fully phased, if the cards were fully face up. Like, for example, the map generation in a Civilization game. Right? You generate the whole map randomly at the beginning of the game, but then the map is the same for the entire game. And that information is always this is stable throughout the game.
Input randomness would theoretically being told the odds of getting something in a pack be a form of input
No,
randomness?
that is output randomness, because it's still random from your decision to open the pack to what you get.
Okay.
Input randomness is when something is already determined randomly, but then you're acting based on that new information.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
So like, yeah.
Okay. So
like map
with that in
generation in a game, or like dungeon generation in a game, right? That's done at the beginning. That's input
right,
randomness.
like Minecraft biome generation.
Right,
is an
generating a
example of
Minecraft
input
map.
Randomness.
Input randomness.
Yes.
But like what mobs spawn at nighttime is output randomness.
Right. Because like the
Unless
state
you-
of the biome
right.
and your presence in it, the context of your presence in it determines. It like influences the randomness.
I'm assuming, unless there's like a really specific algorithm that you could know in advance, and then maybe you could turn monster spawning into input randomness because you can deterministically identify what monsters will spawn where.
No, I agree. I think it's output. Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting wrinkles in that. I think maybe also as interesting is why are you interested? I feel like output randomness, when people think of it, when like you said, when people think randomness, RNG, as the chat was saying earlier, they think of output randomness.
Yes.
What fascinates you about input randomness?
Well, for me, I think I associate input randomness. So no randomness, like a deterministic situation like chess, for example, I think is a strategy game. It's like a strategic, overarching strategy game. And for me, long-term strategy is less interesting than short-term tactical decision making, and input randomness is very good at producing that. Like, for example, drawing a hand in Magic the Gathering is input randomness. You draw your hand and then you react to what's in your hand. You make decisions based off that.
Okay.
Output randomness for me is less interesting. Like, for example, if I play a card in Magic the Gathering that says roll a die, based on the die roll you do this much damage, that situation can, in my opinion, be really frustrating, right? Like, let's say you literally winning the game hinges on you rolling like a 5 or a 6, and you roll like a 2. You just lost the game, not based on your skill, but based on the roll of a die. Granted, that's no statement on whether that's exciting or not, especially from a spectation perspective. That can be really exciting. But for the person experiencing it, depending on their mindset, that can be really frustrating.
Yeah, in a way, okay, if you thought of the states of this game prior to you getting that card and making that move, and then after it, the outcome of the output randomness is almost a form of input randomness into the subsequent state, right? Like
yes, totally true.
And so for that reason, it can be redeemable in a way.
Well,
right?
but I don't think that output randomness is necessary in that situation. I would be fine with that output randomness not existing. Sure. I still think it would be equally tactically interesting because your opponent is making unpredictable decisions that provide new information anyway, right?
Yeah, just for what it's worth, when you were just talking about it, I was thinking that like I think that's part of the element of what makes multiplayer games so interesting, especially from a strategic standpoint, is because the uncertainty of the actions of the other players is a form of input randomness that
it's not randomness. Fresh. That's unpredictability.
It is unpredictability, but like
it's not random because it's predictable by them. Technically, by our definition of randomness, that's not randomness, but I see what you mean. It's changing the game state in such a way that you need to react to it, similar to how input randomness does that as well. It gives you like a different avenue for creating tactical situations that doesn't need any form of randomness, right? That's what makes it so interesting. I agree completely.
Now, there's a whole, I think, a whole genre of games centered around input randomness almost in roguelites, correct?
Roguelites have a combination of input and output randomness, for sure. Like, they're randomly generated dungeons, but it's output randomness, like what items you find. Even though it's determined at the beginning, you don't know, so it's not really input randomness.
Right. But, like, input randomness... I
guess it still is input randomness, right? because it is
it's predetermined.
Right. Even if you don't know about it, that doesn't necessarily make it output randomness. Yeah, so you're totally right.
Roguelites.
Absolutely.
You love roguelites.
They're like one of the most tactical genres of games from a single player perspective that you can have, right? Because you have to make so many split-second decisions based on your current situation because of like what random stuff you get. An output randomness example of a game, just for people who are listening, is like, for example, like gambling is almost all output randomness.
Right.
Like roulette is output random. And some people love that shit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of those people, but
yeah, I think, yeah, that general, I feel like to some extent everyone loves output, like the advantageous and beneficial output randomness result, and it's the thrill of it that like can be so addicting, I feel like, for some people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that people don't play gambling games generally without betting on them.
Right, and there's also a reason why there's fucking laws around people who are too young and shit playing them. Because,
right.
Yeah, I feel like there's a big weakness, I don't know, some kind of crazy evolutionary trait from like when we went fishing as cavemen, and it was like, fuck, am I gonna get a fish this time? Oh fuck, I got a fish, you know, like I don't know where it comes from, how deep-seated it is, but yeah, humans love
extrinsic rewards. Yeah
Well, and when it's, especially because a lot of times the element of randomness, I'm thinking it's also part of the reason why these monetization systems that are centered around randomness,
loot boxes and such,
that now are kind of, they're being outlawed or at least shunned in a lot of ways by development, but they definitely did their job in getting people to pay a fuck ton of money for some stuff, because there's also this like, well, I could get way more, a bigger payoff than like the relative risk I took with this, and that's addicting for people too.
Yeah.
Anyway, to get back to the game side of things, so why I said the roguelites thing is because a lot of the things, I feel like all the points you made in there about how you liked it, how it's, I think, similar to like multiplayer things. It's like there's an element of continuity, but there's a dynamicism to like the refreshing of things every run that is so compelling.
There's an unpredictability that doesn't feel unfair because you have time to like make decisions based on it. Sean makes a really good point in chat about Hearthstone and its output randomness. Hearthstone has some of the most output randomness of any video game. Like, so many of the cards when you play them have random effects, target random units, make random things happen. What cards you draw is technically like output randomness, and what effects those cards have is as well. Sean says, and I agree with this, that when output randomness is at its most fun is when both players get an equal amount of positive RNG events. You know what I mean? Like, if stuff goes well for me randomly and then stuff goes well, that's an exciting match. But unfortunately, the fate is fully determined by the chaos, right? Like that, in that same situation where my thing like destroys your most important unit, but then your thing destroys my most important unit, there's the time where my thing hits your shitty thing and you literally just kill me on your next turn, right?
Right. Now, I feel like there's also different grades of output randomness. There's like totally straight up, and I don't know, maybe this breaks the definition, you can let me know, but there's like straight up randomness where you do something and like the roll of the dice or whatever. Well, even the roll of the dice to some extent. Like, there's what I'm thinking in my head is there's situations where you have like controlled randomness in a way where
pseudo randomness. I'm thinking of
like, like where you have like maybe a Pokemon card where you know that okay, this attack is I don't know, there's a difference between an attack that is a multiplier that has a possibility of returning a 0, and maybe this other one that's like a guaranteed number plus a randomness, right?
Sure. Now and making the decision, like weighing your risk can be a really interesting thing to do. And that is
Right.
one thing output randomness can produce, is like making you assess various levels of risk, which is an interesting decision.
Yeah, and it adds another wrinkle when you are strategizing against your opponent, maybe because you're thinking like, well, I can make this move that puts him in a situation to consider that play and or not, blah blah blah. So yeah, I I don't know. Can you think of where this is kind of also aimed as, like, can you think of games that maybe you find the output randomness adds to it tastefully for you? Because I'll just say I am generally, like, the way I would say it is that I find output randomness to be a lot of fun in casual games. If I'm in a competitive game, I want like basically zero of it.
Yeah,
You know?
I think that's a really strong statement, and I agree. And D Pickles in the chat brings up D&D and as an example, and that was something in my brain as well. D&D is a game, literally output randomness is the core mechanic of D&D. Rolling dice. Literally anything you do, you roll a dice generally. And honestly, so I played D&D recently with D Pickles and some other people, and the least fun situations for me were when I got screwed by the randomness.
Yeah, where it comes down to the
And the
randomness.
most fun situations for me were when my randomness paid off and the like cool thing I thought I should be able to do happened.
Mhm.
And so is that doesn't, I don't think that translates necessarily to fun for me. Like, I would almost rather a situation where I describe what I want to do to the dungeon master and they just make a decision based on its viability and how they're feeling in the narrative of whether that should work or not, rather than letting a dice determine it some of the time.
Mhm.
For me personally, I know some people don't feel that way, but that's maybe how I feel about it.
Yeah, I can't. I am struggling also to think about a game in which I care about winning, in which I enjoy the randomness.
Right.
You know,
That's really hard.
Yeah, I feel like if my intention is to win, I don't want there to be randomness. If my intention is to have fun, I find um, randomness interesting.
No, and
I'm
maybe
trying
that's an interesting like point on my perspective that I just presented on D&D, right? Maybe I'm thinking too much about like wanting my actions to complete rather than just wanting to experience like the story of what happens as determined by the randomness. Like, those two perspectives could totally shift my view of the dice rolls, right?
Yeah, because I think the key thing is I like unpredictability in my challenges.
Mhm.
That makes them fun, and sort of demands at some an inherent amount of skill, like when you play against other people in a multiplayer game, when you're dealing with the mobs in Minecraft. You know, Vinny's calling out Minecraft. It's fun to be presented with like dynamic circumstances and trying to feel things out. But I'm kind of thinking of like, well, what if I had a bow in Minecraft that shot like random arrows that included like a shitty shot? For example, okay, in Super Smash Brothers, my favorite character to use is Mr. Game & Watch, and I never fucking use his side B,
Really?
which is the hammer. Never.
That's so
because
funny.
the amount of times the stupid ass 9 shows up is hardly anything, and I personally haven't spent enough time to maybe like utilize the other numbers and make them efficient or whatever. But like, I ignore the RNG element, even though there's a possibility of that big payoff
Right.
if you get the 9.
See, and I think Game & Watch's side B is like one of his most fun mechanics, because I think it's fun in those situations. And so in Blaze Blue, a fighting game I play, there's a character named Platinum. She, when you hit a button, summons a random weapon that she can fight with for a little while. And I think those situations are really they're fun, because that's sort of input randomness in a way to a situation where you have to make a decision based on like what item you got,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
And that for me is very fun, but I totally see what you mean, that like the risk isn't necessarily worth it. For you might as well just use the turtle that you know is going to fuck them up every time.
Right. Well, exactly. Now, to your point, I hadn't thought so. Probably my favorite mode in Halo 5 was called Super Fiesta.
Okay.
And the way it works is it's just every time you spawn, you are randomly spawned with 2 weapons of any kind in the game. So like you could spawn with the most legendary rocket launcher and the fucking most legendary sniper, or you could spawn with the fucking shittiest ass like automatic guns in the game too. And I love that thing. Not only is it because I think, you know, you enable the entire gamut of sandbox items and so it can be chaos, but the it keeps it so fresh. Like every time you spawn in, you have
I mean,
not only your thing to consider, but the other team's like dynamic spawns.
that's
to
a very like
consider.
roguelike design there, right? That's
It's
like
fun as fuck.
amazing
It's fun
input
as-
randomness. Yeah.
It's fun as fuck, but it's obviously broken like competitively.
Right.
It'd be interesting to see like that kind of a mode with like a set of weapons. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But anyway,
Yeah, like
I
a
love
set
that.
of weapons they think are all balanced, so no matter what loadout, it's technically
like,
balanced.
balanced enough relatively or
Right.
something, and that you could play the probability to kind of almost ensure that the team would land with a certain general set, or I don't know.
Right.
But anyway, I don't. I feel like the managing the unpredictability is fun in a competitive standpoint, but the straight up randomness of things is very frustrating.
Now I'll tell you, in Dota, there actually is a ton of output randomness, or technically there was. Like I said, there's attack ranges, so your attacks do damage in a range. A bunch of things have percent chances to trigger in various situations.
Right.
And almost every single random element in Dota has been shifted to pseudo randomness over the past 3 to 5 years.
What do you mean by pseudo randomness?
So, for example, there's this character named Axe who every time he gets attacked, he has a chance to spin and do damage to everything around him.
Okay.
Previously, it was just like a flat 30% chance or whatever. Now, as it doesn't trigger, the chance it will trigger goes up. So essentially, it guarantees, and some of them are even more out like specific, like things that used to trigger 25% of the time now just trigger like every 3 attacks, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So basically they've tried to smooth it out. So you're basically always hitting either like the 30% is always going to be 30%. You're not going to get like weird events where it happens like 10 times in a row or like never happens after 10 times. Instead, you're going to get a very uniform, consistent thing because people were frustrated that like in a competitive game like Dota, output randomness was determining a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's super interesting.
It is because that's a game that's been around for like 20 years or whatever. And they only in the last like few started shifting to the pseudo random perspective where it was like, oh, wait, this stuff is actually taking away from the competitiveness of the game.
Well, I was going to ask you, like, do you think it's an act of them coming to that realization, or is that an act of them just trying to like freshen up the meta a bit?
No, I definitely think it's the realization. I don't think it really, because that doesn't really change the meta much. Like, it's just making things more predictable in a game where predictability matters. Like in competitive games, some amount of predictability matters because if everything is unpredictable, it's impossible to like use skill to win. Right? Mm-hmm. So that was just trying to eliminate some predictability.
I really
or
like
unpredictability
in games that I really like games that when games can offer both kinds of experiences. It's part of the reason why I think I have played so much fucking Halo over the years is there's this variety of like if you want to be competitive, a something that can be almost more deterministic, right? Like it's just an execution and having fun with it, just managing the unpredictability of the other player's strategies or whatever. And then there's modes that are just pure fucking chaos. So it's like I don't know. For me, at least, I'm in a different mood. My brain's in a different state. I'm looking for a different kind of experience when I'm moving into stuff like that. And actually, I feel like conversations with my wife, with Brittany, some of the games she likes more, Jesse Shell makes this point in his book where randomness can help decrease the skill gap.
Yes.
Right? So like it's part of the reason why
output randomness specifically.
Output randomness will help decrease the skill gap. And it's part of the reason why like I'll never play Brittany in a one-on-one in Super Smash, but we'll play one with like fucking tons of items and
lots of Pokeballs or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yes. So anyway.
Yeah. Now we have both Ben and Rollick in the chat, which means we got to talk about Pokemon and TemTem. Another very interesting example of the conflict of output randomness. Pokemon is a game even competitive VGC level Pokemon has a ton of output randomness. Like crits, there's status effects that are random, how long the statuses effect are random, whether they happen is random. So much random stuff in Pokemon. And like honestly, when I watch people play competitive Pokemon, some of the people who've been playing for a really long time just know they have to just like shrug it off when something horribly, ridiculously random fucks them over. But a lot of people get really angry. So TemTem came along, essentially a Pokemon clone, and said we're gonna make Pokemon, but with zero output randomness. TemTem is completely deterministic. If you knew the full move sets of all the Tems on both players' teams and all their like stat decisions, it's technically solved. Like the game is solvable, right? It's completely deterministic, but because of the player unpredictability, obviously it gets out of that determinism. But yeah, they literally put essentially no output randomness in that game, and there's a large community of people who really like that. I don't know whether I find it more interesting or not. It definitely feels more fair from a competitive standpoint, but that also means I think it's like a lot less exciting to watch. I have to be honest. Like Pokemon is really exciting to watch, and I don't know if it's the output randomness that does that for me, but I do generally enjoy watching Pokemon more than I enjoy watching TemTem, so I don't know why.
When you were talking about this, the thing I thought of was sports in real life was like sports are mostly like
sports are deterministic.
They are, but there are like some elements because of humans playing them that are kind of random.
Yeah, I think there's enough variables that even though they're deterministic, it is impossible to take into account all of the variables to force them to actually be deterministic, right? Like you can't measure the wind resistance against the football to guarantee your throw 100% of the time.
You can't measure the fact that like they threw that ball in this particular stadium at this time of day where the glare's going to hit just right so the motherfucker can't see it.
There are variables that essentially make it random, even though it's technically deterministic.
I guess that's true. Yeah. But anyway, I feel like those are part of the elements that make those compelling to watch too. It's like sure, the two teams have their strategies, but it's like, what can they execute them? What will be the wrinkle that comes in, the player who slips, that moment of lapse or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Meaning, just to your point of like Pokemon's more fun to watch. I agree. I feel like in some ways it also, again, makes it more, I don't know, understandable for the person who's watching. Like you kind of, I think to appreciate some of those TemTem moves, right? Like, you need to like sort of understand really what went into that move, right?
But in Pokemon, if you see like a big crit, that's exciting regardless of the thought that went into it. I will say with sports too, though, that like imagine a sport in like football, if instead of getting to choose your play, you roll the die and that determined what play you did, right? That would make the game less fun. It may make it more interesting to watch just because it'd be goofy. But from like a competitive standpoint, it would really hurt the game. I think the human error randomness, which is maybe its own form of randomness that isn't really in the categories, right? Is really interesting, and people relate to that a lot. I agree with you on that for sure.
Yeah, Ben makes the point that in chat, I mean, you need to understand some of the depth of Pokemon to fully understand all of it. Absolutely, like for sure. It was just to kind of back up the comment on like, I think it is more spectator friendly.
No, totally. I mean, like you can watch someone roll a die in a game, even if you don't really know the rules, and you can probably figure out pretty easily whether that roll was exciting or not, right?
Right.
Whereas if someone makes like a really strategic decision, it can be extremely difficult to like parse why that was so exciting.
I'm just thinking now about Rocket League, and even though Rocket League in that sense is deterministic, right, in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, Rocket League is 100% deterministic. Yeah.
You do have like this element of the human error just because of the insane mechanical depth required at those levels.
Right,
You know
which
I
I
mean?
think this game theory article would call unpredictability, but I really feel like there should be like a third category of randomness where that would fall.
Human.
Right. Because like I
Randomness.
can't determine if I'm going to fuck up my aerial,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and you can't determine sort of the state of mind a person goes into the game that influence something like that. Like if you're nervous as fuck, it has a effect on your ability to execute, you know, or especially like momentum, like in games like morale momentum in some of these things when humans are involved.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
that
humans definitely
plays such a big role.
definitely fuck shit up with that for sure.
Yeah.
Sean brings up another good point. Another interesting way to reduce output randomness, which a lot of board games do in some ways and some video games, is long sets. This
Right.
also reduces the human error randomness too. That's why in like, sports playoffs, they generally do like best of 7s. In video game esports, they do best of 5s, best of 3s, whatever. Generally, long sets reduce unpredictability in general and balance out the randomness in general.
Mm-hmm.
So long sets are a good way to reduce that, but they do take a long time, right? So you have to balance that that's from the spectating perspective, at least.
No, it's interesting how that comment. Some sports do that, and some don't. Like we just finished the South American soccer championships, and the European ones just wrapped up, and those are there. There's group stages at the beginning, but after that, it's knockout. You know,
it's all best of
game.
one.
Yeah, like
that's great. Well, and also like the Super Bowl, right?
Yep,
is best of
football. Football kind of makes sense because you beat the fuck out of each other, and so like you can't. How many times can you do that before? But yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. It does make those moments more intense. I'm sure there's probably some viewership bonus.
Best of ones are really
front.
exciting, dude. That's for sure.
Right. But it's true. Yeah, totally makes sense. Longer sets. Less more predictable.
At least it's more likely that the more skilled group will win if the longer the set is.
Right on.
All right. Do we have any patron questions?
Yes,
I think we had like 2, so maybe we save one for next week. Which one you want to do?
We'll just hit Evans because he asked first. You want me to read it? Good.
Yeah, I was coughing, so you go ahead.
Guys are dying over there. All right. Do you think a platform like Steam will be replaced by something else? In parentheses, he says like Facebook. It feels impossible for another company to sell games and reach the same level of user base. This is asked by Evan Evco Music, who is releasing a new single, by the way, on the 28th of this month. Yeah.
So Anthony and I have actually talked about this exact topic before. Not on the podcast, but in our lives. And I've also talked to some other people about it too. The most interesting example to bring up with this question right now is the Epic Game Store, right? Like we got to talk about Epic Game Store if we're going to talk about Steam competitors.
Somebody supplanting Steam, yeah.
And I mean, we saw Tim Sweeney come out and say, look, we're intentionally losing fuck tons of money on the Epic Game Store in order to even try to compete with Steam. Do you think they've been successful? What is your opinion on where the Epic Game Store is at?
I mean, so he's followed that particular tweet in a way that kind of influences my thought here, because he said that the way they see it is that this was an investment that was going to take maybe even a decade to execute, right? And that's, first of all, I think an important realization. I mean, I would say Microsoft had more resources to pull off a Steam competitor in the Microsoft Store. And so far we've seen how that's gone.
The Microsoft Store's fucking horrible still. Like they've done nothing to make it better.
And that's a big aspect of that. Like I think like the rich. So there's 2 things I think. One is something that Rollick just said in chat, which is he says, I mean, why? Like, why make a Steam competitor? And Epic is proving the point, is like, you are not going to easily, without some kind of combination of good foundational features plus some killer app that's on your thing, right? Like if somebody tomorrow comes out with some crazy augmented reality that somehow just by putting on whatever fucking headset that they have that's $50 completely changes everything you've ever known about video games, and you can only download it through their store and whatever, the investment required to like even compete is like
I mean, look, like
super significant.
Epic had Fortnite. That's essentially exactly what you're talking about. That is
Yeah.
something that like was the most played game in the world at points. And still, that wasn't necessarily enough to. I mean, Epic Games Store's still alive, so maybe it's doing better than we think. But like, it's definitely not competing with Steam in any like notable, real way.
The thing that I think is still just so interesting is like, I mean, sorry to first comment on the Epic game. Not only do they have Fortnite, but I would say, Epic's strategy long term with Unreal Engine as well, and giving developers of Unreal Engine significant discounts for publishing on Unreal, I think is another combination of their thing. I think like Epic's honestly got a couple of meaningful ways to have kicked this off, and
Yeah.
we'll see how it plays out. But the thing that still kind of like blows my mind a little bit is I feel like the thing Steam is so the reason why I will go to Steam over Epic Games to look for stuff is just like a lot of what I would call like a huge amount of quality of life little things, you know?
I mean, they've
like,
had decades to add all that, right? Like they've had long to come up with all that.
Just like the wish listing stuff. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The little things is like how Steam it seems to like excel over
Totally
the other
agreed.
guys.
I think, yeah, I don't know. In my previous conversation on this topic, our conclusion, whoever I was talking to, I can't remember, we decided that really the only company that could feasibly do something to compete with Steam would have to be. Oh no, actually, I'm realizing that's not. Maybe I was talking about Twitch competing and not Steam competing, but it was about Discord trying to compete.
Yeah, I remember this. That
was related to Twitch, right? But I think Discord tried, though. We have to note, Discord had a game store. It had a game app within Discord, and they scrapped it because it was so unsuccessful. People used it so little.
Yeah, I think, well, it's just like what Epic is showing. It's like you have to, the one of the ways, I mean, we know this too, a great way to get people's attention is to give away free shit.
Yep.
Right. And like that is that's been a huge way that they've gotten people able to, like, to check out the Epic store. Like there's been a few times where I'm like, holy fuck, that game's for free. Like,
totally,
but that costs money, and not everyone made Fortnite. And then there's also, you have like the Microsofts who are just like maybe looking at it, and like, for example, it's interesting. Microsoft now, like, their first party games are coming out day and date on Steam.
Right.
Like Microsoft's like
they gave up,
Steam.
right? They essentially gave up.
That is, at least that's the way it looks.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe, their strat right there is like, instead of us spending a fuck ton of money competing on a storefront, how about we spend a fuck ton of money, like somehow maybe integrating Game Pass into Steam,
right? And making a deal with Steam that still benefits them, but also utilizes what Steam already has.
Let's make Game Pass work with Steam people. You know what I mean? It's like, so if you had Game Pass, somehow you still get it free on Steam. Like, you can.
I will be 100% honest. If Game Pass was available fully on Steam, I would probably own it for sure. I don't own it right now, and I have canceled it so many times, literally almost exclusively because I never want to look on the Microsoft store ever. Like, if it was on Steam, it would be hard for me to decide not to own it.
And can I also say, because when we talked about this before, it's been a while since we talked about this, but I was this, I come from a console background. Like,
right.
I have owned consoles all my life. And I was telling you, like, what's the big deal about downloading a different launcher?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not that big of a deal. But I'll be honest, now after some time, we're such like people of like habit and comfort, not comfort, it's not the right word, familiarity, right? It's like I spend all my time in Steam. I want it here. Like,
right.
There was a game that was available on Game Pass, I found out retroactively, but I bought it on Steam because I wanted it in that list.
I did that with Sea of Thieves. I rebought it on Steam and returned my Game Pass so that I could buy it on Steam.
But it's just like, I want to, when I'm sitting there and I want to play games, I want to I want like a single place to look at the games I have.
100%.
I don't want to like open all the other.
I don't want to
things,
have to like
whatever.
remember that I owed games in fucking Origin or Epic Store and be like, oh yeah, I need to go there if I want to play those. I forgot I even owned that
I
game.
hate that shit. So actually, I have come to totally understand why people hate that shit, because I downloaded Titanfall, I think, on Origin, and I'm like, this is so fucking stupid.
Yeah.
It's like, put it on Steam, you know? Like,
All
I
right.
don't give a fuck if you make less money.
That was a good answer. That was a good question. Thanks for the question, Evan. So anything else? You good? You want to tell people where they can find us?
I just one last thing I want to add, because he made this call out to Facebook. The one
true.
reason I think the main way you could supplant Steam is if another type of form of gaming that becomes prominent through another storefront takes over. So for example, okay, mobile Facebook gaming is like big in mobile space. If somehow mobile,
I mean, you can even just talk about the Play Store or the Apple Store, right? Like they've technically replaced Steam from a mobile game perspective.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how I think in some kind of way you could circle back and supplant Steam. Like I don't know if cloud gaming becomes crazy and the way you interface to that is through like the Microsoft
through
services,
Amazon
the
Luna
services, yeah. And then someday that's like the de facto way you get games, and that's like I could see that, but I don't in their territory. Maybe I could put it that way. In this current PC territory, like I can't see anybody outright supplanting them.
Or
maybe
even
Epic can get close. I don't know, because like if with the increasing commoditization of Epic game making tech with Unreal Engine, maybe Unreal Engine is like so fucking good, everyone's just like like a large percentage of developers are like, we should use Unreal. And then if you're using Unreal, the difference between 5% and 30% is fucking huge.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
interesting.
It won't come easy.
No. And I think it also, for something to supplant Steam, even in like cloud or whatever, that would also require Steam to not innovate rapidly to get that. It would require Steam to be like lazy about it and not migrate fast enough. And I feel like Steam is pretty good about keeping up with things like that, or at least they
do because my impression of Valve is that they kind of only do shit if they find it interesting.
Yes,
you know?
Yeah. But I feel like their business surviving is something they find interesting.
Yeah, I feel like what would happen before that though is like, I think if Epic really was concerning to Valve and the Epic Store was really concerning to Valve, you'd just see Valve be like, okay, psych, it's 12% for everybody.
Right,
you know
right.
what I
They
mean?
haven't reduced their percent yet, so clearly Epic Store hasn't done
They're
much.
clearly not that worried.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, where can people find us?
You can find us at koalaentertainment.com. There you have links to all of our social media. Most importantly, this is really super, super importantly, Discord. Over the next few weeks, we got a question on Instagram today. Somebody asked, how's game development going? Blah, blah, blah. And some people who have ordered merch recently, or patrons who have gotten some free merch recently, get these like little sneak peek messages that I send them in the mail. But I'll let you guys know. Over the next few weeks, there's the biggest, most impactful content and development related release that our studio's ever done. Where can I get the merch? Bob says he wants to know these secret messages himself. We will post the link here in a moment for you. You can get the merch. You can get a link to our merch in our website, koalaentertainment.com. There you have a link that takes you right to our merch store. That huge impact directly helps support studio expenses that we we always just cover out of our own pockets. So thank you so much for everyone who supports us this way. And keep your eyes peeled, especially join the Discord. Follow us on whatever social media you follow, because there's big things literally weeks away.
If you want to know about the game, join the Discord in the next 3 weeks. I'll be that obvious about it.
It is the most impactful, significant content and release / update we've ever done.
Indeed. So get ready, get hype. I spent a long time making that shit. So did Josh. So did Anthony. Various parts of it. So it was very exciting.
Yes, I'm very, 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 very super excited.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Boo bye.